Can you imagine being brutally shoved to the ground by your own father at your own birthday party in front of 127 of Boston's most influential people? It happened to me. But what shocked them wasn't the violence. It was the sound of my laughter echoing through the stunned silence. A slow, deliberate chuckle that promised utter ruin. My name is Elise Harrington, and that night, as I lay on the cold marble, blood trickling from my lip, my expensive designer dress torn, my adoptive parents stood over me, their eyes burning with triumph. They had no idea that in that very instant, they had just triggered the complete, catastrophic destruction of their $3.2 billion empire. This is the story of how 4 years of meticulous planning turned my 29th birthday celebration into the most explosive courtroom Boston never saw coming. And trust me, it's a story you won't believe. The Harrington Estate, a sprawling $18 million limestone fortress in Beacon Hill, was a monument to old money. For 25 years, it was my gilded cage. I moved in at age 4, after Victoria and James Harrington rescued me from the wreckage of my parents' fatal car accident. Or, as Victoria loved to announce at every gala, her manicured hand clamping onto my shoulder like a shackle. This is Elise, our little charity project. We saved her from the foster system. Isn't that right, dear? I learned early to offer a grateful smile and nod, playing the perfect, appreciative orphan, while Boston's elite fawned over their generosity. They didn't see the locked doors, the documents I was forced to sign but never allowed to read. They didn't see the systematic erasure of my identity. For a quarter century, I was their living tax deduction, their shiny proof of humanitarian virtue. Every charity board in the city knew their story, how they transformed a traumatized child into a Harvard law graduate, presenting my achievements as their own creation. But behind those grand oak doors, I was less than staff. Staff got paid. Staff could quit. I was simply inventory, an asset to be managed, controlled, and eventually liquidated. The first crack in my carefully constructed reality appeared during my second year at Morrison & Associates. I'd begun reviewing my trust fund statements, something Victoria had always insisted on handling herself, to spare me the burden. But there they were, discrepancies. Tiny at first, a few thousand here, a transfer there. Then, a chilling pattern emerged. Over 4 years, $47 million had been systematically drained from the trust my biological parents had left me. Money that, according to their will, should have been mine at 25. It had vanished into a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. Family doesn't question family, James had sneered when I tentatively tried to inquire. Just sign here, trust us. But trust, I was rapidly discovering, was a luxury I could no longer afford. The true, horrifying scope of their theft became agonizingly clear during a late night at the law firm. I traced the money transfers, following paper trails that snaked through 12 different shell companies, all registered in Delaware, all with innocent-sounding names like Beacon Holdings LLC and Heritage Investment Partners. Just sign here, Elise. No need to read everything. Victoria's voice, a ghost from my memory, echoed in my ears as I stared at my own signature on documents I'd never seen. Documents authorizing the transfer of millions from my trust into accounts I didn't control. I realized with a gut-wrenching certainty, they'd been drugging me. Small, undetectable doses of sedatives in my morning coffee on signing days. Just enough to make me compliant, foggy, my memory blurred. I'd always dismissed it as stress from law school, from work. But the pattern was too perfect. Every signing day followed by exhaustion, memory gaps, a haze over my own life. My $180,000 annual salary at Morrison & Associates, respectable for a fourth-year associate, was a cruel joke. Every cent was monitored, direct deposited into an account Victoria had helped me set up. Credit cards she reviewed monthly for my protection. Even my work bonuses mysteriously vanished into family investments that I never saw returns from. The cruelest part? They made me thank them for it. We're teaching you financial responsibility. James would lecture, reviewing my expense reports like I was a criminal. All while they stole millions, using my own money to fund their lavish lifestyle, keeping me dependent on their approval for a $20 lunch. But that night, I uncovered something even more sinister. The money wasn't just stolen. It was being laundered through political campaigns. 3 state senators, 2 federal judges, all receiving generous donations from companies funded by my inheritance. My parents hadn't just left me money. They had inadvertently left me evidence of a vast conspiracy that reached into the highest echelons of Boston's power structure. I needed proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof that would stand up in court and, just as importantly, in the court of public opinion. It was then I understood. If I wanted to escape, truly escape, I would have to play a longer, colder game than they could ever expect from their grateful little charity case. 4 years ago, I attended a Massachusetts Bar Association conference. It should have been just another dull networking obligation, a ballroom filled with 300 lawyers, rubber chicken, and stale coffee. But that night, I met Marcus Sullivan. He wasn't like the others. He stood by the windows, observing the crowd like a chess master analyzing 3 moves ahead. He was a senior partner at Sullivan & Associates, the only firm in Boston that had never touched Harrington money. When I approached, he didn't ask. He stated, "You're the Harrington foster daughter, the one they parade around at charity events." Adopted daughter. I corrected automatically, the rehearsed response slipping out. His eyes narrowed. "Is that what you tell yourself, or what they tell you to say?" Something in his tone made me truly see him. He was 62, built like a boxer who'd somehow gone to Yale, with scars on his knuckles that hinted his education hadn't all come from books. "I've seen this before," he said quietly. "The micro-expressions when I mention your name. The way you flinch when Victoria touches you. The practiced smile that never quite reaches your eyes." My chest tightened with a raw ache. 25 years of flawless performance, and this stranger had seen right through me in mere minutes. "If you ever want to talk," he said, slipping me his card, "about anything, legal matters or otherwise." That night, I did something I'd never dared before. I called him. First rule, Marcus said when we met at an anonymous diner, far from Beacon Hill's watchful eyes. If you want to escape them, you need evidence. Not suspicions, not feelings. Evidence that will hold up in federal court. He taught me about RICO statutes, financial forensics, the brutal difference between civil and criminal liability. But most importantly, he gave me something I'd never had, an ally. Someone who saw the Harringtons for the monstrous manipulators they truly were. "They're going to escalate when they sense you pulling away," he warned. "People like them always do. So when they do, and they will, you need to be ready to document everything." That's when he handed me my first recording device. Tiny, magnetic, designed to look like a button. Every conversation, every threat, every forced signature, he instructed, "You're building a case, Elise. And when you're ready, we're going to burn their whole kingdom down." For the first time in my life, I had not just hope, but a real, tangible plan. 6 months into building my case, the full, terrifying scope of what I stood to lose became crystal clear. Marcus had connected me with a forensic accountant working off the books who traced money flows through encrypted channels the Harringtons thought were invisible. $47 million, she stated, sliding a folder across the table at our meeting in a bustling Chinatown restaurant. Withdrawn over 4 years through 163 separate transactions. Small enough to avoid federal reporting requirements, frequent enough to drain you dry. But it wasn't just theft. The money had been laundered through a network that made my stomach turn. 3 state senators, Morrison, Blackwood, and Reeves, had each received $2.3 million through consulting fees from companies that existed only on paper, funded entirely by my inheritance. "There's more," the accountant continued, her voice grim. "Federal judges Harper and Steinberg. They've been getting quarterly payments through a real estate investment trust. Your money bought their vacation homes in Martha's Vineyard." The implications were staggering, suffocating. This wasn't just about my trust fund. This was about purchased influence at every level of Massachusetts government. My biological parents' money, meant to secure my future, had instead built a sprawling corruption network that controlled courts, legislation, and law enforcement. And then, the kicker, federal RICO statutes had a 5-year limit. In precisely 72 hours, the first transactions would age out of prosecution range. Every single day I waited, another crucial piece of evidence became legally worthless. If you don't file by Monday, Marcus had warned, his voice urgent, you lose $8 million worth of claims. By December, that number hits $20 million. The Harringtons must have known this. That's why Victoria had been pushing so hard lately, insisting I sign new power of attorney documents for estate planning purposes. Then, I intercepted an email meant for James. Dr. Thompson, a psychiatrist who had never once examined me, had already prepared commitment papers. The diagnosis: delusional disorder with paranoid features. The recommendation: immediate involuntary commitment for her own safety. She's become obsessed with conspiracy theories about the family finances. She poses a danger to herself and potentially others. They were going to have me declared mentally incompetent. Once that happened, Victoria would gain full control of whatever meager remnants of my inheritance remained. My testimony would be dismissed as the ravings of a disturbed mind. My evidence worthless. The commitment hearing was scheduled for November 16th, the day after my birthday party. That's when the horrifying realization hit me. The party wasn't a celebration. It was designed to be my last public appearance as a legally competent adult. Whatever sinister act they planned to execute there would be witnessed by Boston's most powerful people, all of whom would then testify that I'd seemed disturbed or erratic. I had one chance, one night, and if I failed, I would lose more than money. I would lose my freedom, my sanity, every last shred of hope for justice. The clock wasn't just ticking, it was screaming. By the way, if you're still with me and on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button. More unbelievable stories and revelations are coming, and you don't want to miss a single one. James' threats against my legal career weren't empty posturing. He'd already shown me his reach. Sarah Chun, a paralegal who'd helped me photocopy documents after hours, was fired within 48 hours for performance issues despite glowing reviews. Michael Torres, a junior associate who dared ask too many questions about Harrington accounts, suddenly found himself transferred to the firm's satellite office in Worcester. Jennifer Park, who offered to testify about witnessing Victoria forge my signature, received an anonymous call from the State Bar about her professional conduct. One phone call, Elise, James had said over dinner just last week, cutting his steak with surgical precision. That's all it takes. Every managing partner in Boston owes me favors. Every judge golfs in my club. You think that Harvard law degree means something? I can make it worth less than the paper it's printed on. He wasn't bluffing. I'd already been mysteriously passed over for partnership track despite billing more hours than any other fourth-year associate. My name was removed from a high-profile class action case without explanation. 14 firms, from white shoe establishments to boutique practices, had rejected my applications with identical, vague language about not being the right fit. The Harrington reach wasn't just limited to Boston. Through their vast connections, they'd poison wells in New York, D.C., even Los Angeles. Hacked email threads showed their coordinated efforts to blacklist me nationwide. She's unstable, Victoria had written to the managing partner of Cromwell and Associates. We've tried to help her, but she has paranoid tendencies. Hiring her would be a liability risk. But then, yesterday, everything shifted. An encrypted email appeared in my personal account from a sender the Harringtons didn't monitor. It read, Special Agent Diana Walsh, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Miss Harrington, we've been investigating irregularities in campaign finance records that trace back to accounts connected to your trust fund. If you have documentation that could assist our investigation, we're prepared to offer witness protection and ensure your professional credentials remain intact, regardless of any retaliation attempts. Time is of the essence. They already knew. The FBI had been building their own case, but they needed an insider. Someone with access to family records, private conversations, internal documents. They needed me. Marcus had been right all along. This was so much bigger than just family theft. It was a federal conspiracy case, a powder keg waiting to explode. And now, I held a detonator. I typed my response carefully. I have 1,147 pages of documentation, 234 audio recordings, and 89 witnesses ready to testify. I can provide everything. Monday morning, November 16th. Her reply came within minutes. Understood. Whatever happens between now and then, document everything. We will be monitoring. The birthday party was tomorrow. The commitment hearing the day after. But now, I had federal backup waiting in the wings. The Harringtons thought they were carefully closing a trap around me. They had no idea they were walking directly into their own. Tell me, have you ever been trapped in a situation where standing up meant losing everything, but staying silent meant losing yourself? Drop a comment below and share a time you had to choose between safety and truth. Your story matters, and you're not alone in this fight. If this resonates with you, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens when the tables finally turn. The dinner the night before my birthday party was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Every word was sharpened, meant to cut deep. Tomorrow will be special, Victoria purred, her voice silk over steel. I'm looking forward to it, I replied, my tone carefully matching hers. Everyone important will be there, James muttered, barely glancing up from his phone. 127 people, to be exact, Victoria corrected, her smile sharp as winter ice. That's very specific. I'm used keeping my voice neutral. I like precision, don't you, dear? Her eyes gleamed. I'm learning to appreciate it, I said. Good. Learning is important, she paused, a sinister emphasis on the next words, while you still can. The unspoken threat hung between us like a freshly drawn blade. The Blackwoods confirmed, James interjected. The senators, too. How wonderful. My fingers, hidden beneath the table, found the tiny recording device in my pocket. They're eager to see you, Elise. Victoria's eyes glittered with malicious amusement. To see how you've developed. I'm sure I won't disappoint, I said, holding her gaze. No, she replied slowly, a chilling certainty in her voice. I don't think you will. The photographer will be there at 8, James added. To capture memories? I asked, a faint irony in my voice. To capture truth, Victoria corrected, her smile unwavering. We ate in silence for what felt like an eternity, 30 seconds that stretched into hours. Finally, Victoria spoke again. Your dress arrived. The blue one from 5 years ago. Waste not, why not? Besides, her smile turned cruel. It's fitting. How so? You'll understand tomorrow. Will I? Oh yes. Clarity is coming, Elise. For everyone. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. What does that mean? Nothing. Just agreeing with you. You've been doing a lot of that lately. James's voice was thick with suspicion. I've learned my place. Have you? Victoria leaned forward, a dangerous glint in her eyes. And where is that? Wherever you decide it should be. Good girl. The condescension dipped like poison. That's the first smart thing you've said in months. I aim to please. Tomorrow you'll do more than please. She stood, her voice rising in a chilling crescendo. You'll perform. Perform one last time for the family. After tomorrow, everything changes, James added, pushing back his chair. Yes, I said quietly, a tremor of satisfaction I hoped they couldn't detect in my voice. Everything. Victoria froze at the doorway. What was that? I said, yes, I understand. She studied me for a long, unsettling moment. Dr. Thompson will be there, she said, a new, predatory smile spreading across her face. The psychiatrist. Just a friend, but good to have professional opinions close by. In case anyone seems disturbed, of course. Safety first. Remember that tomorrow, Elise? Safety first. They left me alone with the wreckage of dinner and the immense, terrifying weight of what was coming. Back in my room, I opened my laptop to the encrypted folder Marcus had taught me to hide. 1,147 pages of evidence, organized with the precision of a federal indictment. Bank statements, forged signatures, shell company registrations, email threads where they discuss my management as if I were livestock. The 234 audio files were backed up across 7 cloud services, each with different trigger conditions. If my phone detected a sudden impact, like being violently shoved to the ground, everything would auto-upload to pre-selected recipients. The FBI, the Boston Globe, the Wall Street Journal, even WikiLeaks. Because why not? Marcus called it a dead man's switch, though he'd winced at the term. If they get physical, he'd explained, the accelerometer in your phone triggers the upload. 10 seconds later, everything goes live. They touch you. They destroy themselves. I tested it a dozen times, dropping my phone from different heights, different angles. Each time, the system worked flawlessly. A small notification would appear. Emergency protocols activated, files transmitted. But the real beauty was in the timing. The emails were scheduled to send at 8:47 p.m. tomorrow, precisely when Victoria planned to deliver her grand speech about family and charity. Each recipient would receive different, carefully curated pieces of the puzzle, ensuring the story couldn't be buried or spun. The Wall Street Journal would get the financial crimes. The FBI would get the money laundering evidence. The IRS would see 2 decades of tax fraud. Local news would get the juiciest family drama. Social media influencers with millions of followers would receive video clips perfectly sized for viral sharing. I pulled up the metadata from the security cameras I'd had installed in the main hall 2 weeks ago, disguised as routine maintenance. 3 angles, all streaming to off-site servers. Whatever happened tomorrow would be captured in stunning 4K resolution, with timestamp authentication that would hold up in any court. My phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca Martinez at the Wall Street Journal. Story ready to run on your signal. Front page, above the fold. Everything was in place. 4 years of planning condensed into one single, terrifying moment of calculated risk. Tomorrow, they would try to destroy me in front of everyone who mattered. Tomorrow, I would let them try. The pattern had been there all along, hidden in 20 years of family videos I digitized just last month. 6 incidents, same trigger, same horrifying result. Christmas 2018, Victoria whispers, "Remember your duty, James," when her sister questioned their parenting. James throws a crystal glass against the wall. Thanksgiving 2019, the phrase again when a reporter asked about irregularities in their charity finances. James grabbed the man's collar, had to be pulled away. The graduation party, the merger celebration, 2 board meetings. Each time, Victoria deployed those 4 words like launching a missile, and James, reliable as clockwork, would explode into violence. It was conditioning, Pavlovian. 20 years of insidious psychological manipulation that had turned a grown man into a weapon, activated by his wife's whisper. I'd found Victoria's journals in the attic, dated back to when they first adopted me. James requires careful management, she'd written. His temper is useful, but needs direction. The phrase works best when he's already agitated. Public settings increase compliance. His fear of judgment makes him more susceptible to suggestion. She'd been training him like an attack dog, using his insecurities about his working-class background, his fear of losing status, his desperate need for her approval. The violence was never random. It was Victoria's violence, executed by James's hands. But tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow there would be cameras, federal witnesses, a room full of Boston's elite with their phones ready to record any drama. The newest security footage from the main hall showed something truly interesting. The specific camera angles I'd requested captured not just the center of the room, but also the corners where Victoria typically stood during speeches. The audio pickup was studio quality, capable of capturing whispers from 30 feet away. If she whispered to James tomorrow, when she whispered to James tomorrow, it would be recorded. The trigger phrase, the command, the resulting violence, all documented with timestamp verification that would prove premeditation. I pulled up the criminal code on my laptop. Assault with conspiracy. Aggravated assault in front of witnesses. If James touched me after Victoria's command, it wouldn't just be family drama. It would be irrefutable evidence of systematic abuse, captured in perfect clarity, automatically distributed to law enforcement before anyone could delete or deny. 20 years of conditioning had made James a loaded gun. Tomorrow, Victoria would pull the trigger, and the recoil would destroy them both. My phone lit up with an encrypted message from Rebecca Martinez. Boston Society pages are buzzing about tomorrow. My editor cleared the entire front section. Whatever happens, we're ready. Rebecca had been investigating the Harringtons for 2 years, following a tip about campaign finance violations that led her into a maze of shell companies and political payoffs. When Marcus connected us 6 months ago, she nearly cried seeing my documentation. "This is Pulitzer material," she declared, scanning through the evidence. "But more importantly, this is justice." She wasn't alone. The network Marcus had helped me build was extraordinary. 89 witnesses ready to testify, each with their own crucial piece of the puzzle. There was Robert Fitzgerald, former CFO of Harrington Industries, who'd been forced out when he questioned suspicious transfers. He'd kept copies of everything. 10 years of double books, showing two different realities, the one presented to investors and the real one. The USB drive he'd given me contained enough financial fraud to trigger a federal audit that would last years. Maria Santos, our housekeeper for 15 years, had documented every instance of abuse she'd witnessed. The locked rooms when I disappointed them, the meals withheld as punishment, the medications forced on me without prescriptions. Dr. Alan Morrison, no relation to the senator, my pediatrician after the adoption, had kept notes about injuries that didn't match their explanations, behavioral changes that suggested trauma, and Victoria's request to prescribe sedatives for a 4-year-old child. "I've waited 25 years to tell someone," he'd said when I approached him. But perhaps the most damaging witness would be Thomas Harrington, James's younger brother, who'd been cut out of the family business for asking too many questions. He had recordings from the 1990s, even before I was adopted, showing the exact pattern of financial manipulation and violence that defined the Harrington empire. "They did to me first," he'd told me, his voice thick with old pain. "Drained my trust fund, destroyed my reputation when I fought back. I've been waiting for someone brave enough to stand up to them." The FBI had already interviewed 30 of these witnesses, building their RICO case independently. Agent Walsh had confirmed that morning, "We have enough to move forward, but your evidence is the keystone. It connects everything." The irony was beautiful. Victoria and James believed tomorrow's party would be my public humiliation, surrounded by their powerful friends who would witness my breakdown and support their commitment petition. Instead, they had invited 127 potential witnesses to their own destruction. Judges who would be forced to recuse themselves from future proceedings. Politicians who would scramble to distance themselves from the looming scandal. Society figures who would provide detailed accounts of whatever violence occurred. They had built the perfect stage for their own downfall, decorated it with flowers, and sent engraved invitations for the world to watch it happen. The Harrington Industries Board had one crucial vulnerability they'd never imagined would matter. Section 14.3 of their corporate bylaws, which James himself had insisted upon after a rival scandal in 2015. It stipulated that any board member or executive who commits an act of violence at a company-affiliated event would be subject to immediate termination without severance, and would forfeit all voting shares to the board's emergency trust. My birthday party, while personal, was being paid for by Harrington Industries as a client entertainment expense. I had the receipts, $500,000 charged to corporate accounts, justified as relationship building with key stakeholders by their own classification. Tomorrow was legally a company event. Marcus had practically laughed out loud when he found it. James had written his own professional death warrant. But there was more. 3 years ago, James had been arrested for assault at a private club in Manhattan. Victoria had made it disappear with money and connections, but the arrest record still existed. The victim had signed an NDA in exchange for $2 million, my money, I discovered. But NDAs didn't apply to federal criminal investigations. A second arrest for assault would violate his pretrial diversion agreement. He'd face mandatory jail time. No negotiations possible. Then, there was Victoria's hidden weakness. She'd been meticulously building a case against James for 2 years, preparing for a divorce that would let her take everything. I found her lawyer's files hidden in her study. Photographs of James with other women, records of hidden assets, even a psychological evaluation suggesting he was unfit to manage finances. She planned to trigger his violence tomorrow, document it, and use it as grounds for both divorce and a corporate takeover. What she didn't know was that conspiracy to incite violence was a federal crime, especially when it resulted in assault. The security cameras would capture her whisper. The audio would record the trigger phrase. The timestamp would show James's immediate, violent reaction. Together, it would prove not just assault, but conspiracy, premeditation, and 20 years of conditioned abuse. The beautiful thing about narcissists, Marcus had explained, is they document everything. They can't help themselves. Every victory must be recorded. Every manipulation must be perfected. He was right. Victoria had kept journals, recordings, even videos of her training sessions with James. She thought they were trophies. Tomorrow, they would become evidence. My phone buzzed with a message from Agent Walsh. Judge Harrison signed off on surveillance warrants for tomorrow. Every federal agent in Boston knows what's happening. The moment James touches you, we move. I pulled up the final, chilling piece of the puzzle. A contract Victoria had signed last week, giving her power of attorney over James in case of incapacitation. She'd been planning to have him committed after the assault, taking control of everything. Instead, she meticulously documented her motive for conspiracy. Tomorrow at 8:47 p.m., when she whispered those 4 words, Victoria would sign both their death warrants. And I, Elise Harrington, would be the pen. The Harrington Ballroom had been transformed into what looked less like a party and more like a coronation hall. $500,000 had bought crystal chandeliers rented from the Met, orchids flown in from Thailand, and enough champagne to drown Boston's collective conscience. 127 guests arrived in waves of designer gowns and Swiss watches. Senator Morrison, fresh from blocking a healthcare bill, kissed Victoria's cheek. Judge Harper, who'd ruled in favor of Harrington Industries 6 times, admired the ice sculptures. CEO after CEO, all bound to the Harringtons by debt, favor, or blackmail, filled the room with nervous laughter. I stood there in the same 5-year-old blue dress I'd worn to my Harvard Law graduation before I truly knew what my family was. Victoria had chosen it deliberately, a subtle, cruel reminder of when I'd been obedient, grateful, controllable. Elise, dear. Victoria's voice cut through the crowd, a siren's call. She wore a $50,000 Dior gown that screamed dominance. Come greet the Blackwoods. They're simply dying to hear about your little job. Mrs. Blackwood, whose husband ran the state's largest development firm, looked at me with the kind of saccharine pity reserved for 3-legged dogs. Still at that small firm, dear? Victoria mentioned you've been having difficulties. Some transitions. Indeed. I replied carefully, feeling the reassuring weight of the recording device hidden on my person. Some transitions. Well, Mr. Blackwood chuckled, a patronizing sound. Not everyone can handle real pressure. Good thing you have family to fall back on. The irony was so thick, I could taste it, a bitter tang in my mouth. These people, who had built empires on corruption and my stolen money, were discussing pressure while sipping champagne bought with blood. At 7:30, Dr. Thompson arrived, making no effort to hide his purpose. He introduced himself to guests as a friend of the family, specializing in difficult cases. His briefcase likely held the commitment papers, waiting for Victoria's signal. Elise looks tired, he said loudly to Judge Harper. The stress of maintaining false narratives can be exhausting. Indeed, the judge replied, his eyes carefully avoiding mine. Young people today face unique challenges. They were laying the groundwork, building their case, creating witnesses to my supposed instability. Every conversation felt like testimony being prepared. At 8:15, Victoria clinked her glass, the delicate chime cutting through the opulent room. The crowd fell silent. Before we toast Elise's birthday, she began, her voice carrying perfectly across the hushed room. I want to share something about family, about charity, about the burdens we choose to carry. James stood stiffly beside her, his jaw tight, hands clenched. He'd been drinking since 7, an unusual indulgence for him. Victoria herself had been pouring his drinks, each one stronger than the last. The cameras were rolling, phones were recording, the stage was meticulously set. 25 years ago, Victoria continued, her voice dripping with false warmth. James and I made a decision that changed our lives. We took in a broken, traumatized child who had nothing. The crowd murmured appreciatively. I saw phones lifting, recording what they assumed would be a heartwarming speech. Elise came to us damaged. Victoria emphasized the word, driving it home like a nail. 4 years old, covered in her parents' blood, unable to speak for months. The doctors said she might never recover. This was new. She'd never mentioned blood before, never claimed I'd been unable to speak. She was rewriting history for her audience, painting me as even more broken than I'd ever been. We spent millions on therapy, education, opportunities, she went on, her eyes finding mine across the room, a chilling challenge in their depths. Harvard wasn't cheap. Neither were the mistakes along the way. Mistakes? Senator Morrison prompted, playing his part to perfection. Oh, the broken items, the tantrums, the incidents. Victoria sighed dramatically. Raising someone else's child is the ultimate charity, but it requires infinite patience. James shifted beside her, his face flushed from the alcohol and a building, barely suppressed rage. His eyes darted to me, then away, as if he were fighting an unseen battle within himself. Some people, Victoria continued, her voice hardening, no matter how much you give them, remain fundamentally ungrateful. They bite the hand that feeds them. They spread lies about those who save them. The room's atmosphere shifted. This wasn't a toast. This was a public execution. We've recently discovered that Elise has been making disturbing accusations about our family, Victoria announced, a feigned sorrow in her tone. Paranoid fantasies about stolen money, conspiracies, abuse that never happened. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Dr. Thompson stepped forward slightly, ready to play his role as the concerned psychiatrist. It breaks our hearts, James slurred, his voice thick with alcohol. After everything we've done, which is why Victoria's voice hardened further, we've made the difficult decision that Elise needs professional help. Real help, the kind that requires commitment. The word hung in the air, a chilling pronouncement. Everyone understood exactly what she meant. But first, she raised her glass, a serpent smile on her lips. Let's toast the birthday girl. Elise, come here. It wasn't a request. 127 pairs of eyes turned to me, waiting to see if I'd comply. The cameras kept rolling. The recordings continued. I walked forward, each step measured, my phone a heavy, comforting weight in my pocket. The accelerometer was armed and ready. That's a good girl, Victoria purred as I approached. Always best to know your place. James's breathing was audible now, harsh and rapid. His hands trembled. Victoria leaned close to him, her lips barely moving. I saw her mouth form the words. This is it, the moment everything changes. What do you think happens when a narcissist's perfect plan backfires in front of everyone they're trying to impress? Drop your prediction in the comments below. If you're holding your breath right now, imagine how I felt standing there. Like this video if you're ready to see justice served, and share it with someone who needs to know that truth always finds a way. Remember your duty, James. The words were barely a whisper of venomous hiss, but the microphones I'd planted caught them perfectly. Victoria's lips brushed his ear, her hands squeezing his arm in the exact pressure point she'd trained him to respond to. The change in James was instantaneous. His pupils dilated. His breathing hitched for a second, then resumed in sharp, ragged bursts. 20 years of conditioning took over, bypassing conscious thought. His hand came up fast, a blur of motion, catching me squarely in the chest with enough force to send me staggering backward. My heel caught on the edge of the cold marble floor. Time slowed. The crystal chandelier lights spun overhead like dying stars. I hit the cold marble with a sickening thud. Pain shot through my shoulder, my hip, my head. Blood filled my mouth where I'd bitten my lip. My dress tore along the seam, the sound sharp as breaking glass. The room exploded in gasps, screams, the crash of dropped champagne flutes. 127 of Boston's most powerful people had just witnessed an assault. But I didn't get up. I lay there for 5 long, deliberate seconds, feeling my phone vibrate against my ribs. The accelerometer had triggered. 1,147 pages of evidence were uploading. 234 audio files were being distributed. 89 witnesses were being notified. Then, lying on that cold floor with blood on my lips and my adoptive parents standing over me like conquering heroes, I did something they'd never, ever expected. I laughed. It started low, a guttural chuckle that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than my chest. Then it grew, becoming something rich and dark and absolutely, undeniably certain. Ha ha ha. Each sound deliberate, measured. Finally, I gasped, "You finally did it." Victoria's face went white, a mask of pure shock. James stumbled backward, the fog of conditioning clearing from his eyes as he realized the magnitude of what he'd done. "What?" Victoria stammered, her voice a strangled whisper. "Check your phones," I said, still lying there, blood dripping onto the pristine white marble. "All of you. Check them now." The notifications had already begun. Pings and buzzes filled the room as every single guest received something. A news alert, a social media tag, an email marked urgent. "What did you do?" Victoria's voice cracked, desperation creeping in. I smiled up at her. This woman who had stolen my childhood, my money, my identity. This woman who had trained her husband like an attack dog and set him loose on a room full of witnesses. "I didn't do anything," I said, finally sitting up, my phone still recording everything. "You did." And everyone just watched. The first scream came from Senator Morrison's wife, staring at her phone in horror. The dominoes had begun to fall. I stood slowly, deliberately, brushing marble dust from my torn dress. Blood still trickled from my lip, and I let it. Every camera in the room was on me now. Phones, security feeds, and the news crew Rebecca Martinez had cleverly snuck in as event photographers. "Thank you, James," I said, my voice carrying across the silent, stunned ballroom. "You just gave me exactly what I needed." My phone buzzed again. I pulled it out, showing the screen to the room. Emergency protocols activated. Files transmitted to 47 recipients. "You're insane," Victoria hissed, her composure finally shattering. "Dr. Thompson, she's having an episode." "No," I interrupted, my voice calm, clear, and utterly in control. "But you might want to check your email, Doctor." The Massachusetts Medical Board just received an interesting package about pre-signed commitment papers for a patient you've never examined. Thompson's phone chimed. His face went gray as he read. 15 news organizations just received 1,147 pages of documentation, I announced, walking toward the projection screen Victoria had used for her speech. Financial records, forged signatures, shell companies, money laundering through campaign donations. I connected my phone to the screen. The first document appeared, a bank transfer authorization with my forged signature, dated when I was 12 years old. That's fabricated," James stammered, his face a picture of terror. "Is it?" I swiped to the next image. "This is from Harrington Industries' internal audit. Your own CFO documented it before you fired him." "Robert," I called out, "would you like to comment?" Robert Fitzgerald stepped out from behind a pillar where he'd been waiting, his face resolute. "Every word she's saying is true. I have 10 years of records proving systematic theft." The room erupted. Senator Morrison was already heading for the door, but found FBI agents blocking his path. "Oh, did I mention?" I continued, my voice steady despite the searing pain in my body. "The FBI has been watching this party. Agent Walsh, I believe you have something to say." Diana Walsh entered with 6 other agents, her badge gleaming. "James Harrington, you're under arrest for assault." "Victoria Harrington, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault, wire fraud, and violations of the RICO Act." "This is ridiculous," Victoria shrieked, her voice hoarse with fury. "We're her parents. We saved her." "No," I said, swiping to the next document. "The real police report from my parents' accident. You killed them. This is the toxicology report, showing my father was drugged before the crash. The same sedatives you've been giving me for 20 years. The prescription in your name, Victoria." The silence was absolute, heavier than any tomb. Every transaction, every forged document, every crime, it was all being published as we spoke. I looked at the crowd of complicit elite, their faces frozen in horror, their names implicated in the documents now flooding the internet. Phones began ringing frantically, lawyers being called, PR teams being awakened. The empire was crumbling, and everyone could hear its deafening fall. The projection screen lit up with a web of financial transactions, a spider's web made of numbers. Each strand led back to my trust fund, and each connection had a name attached. $47 million, I announced, zooming in on the total stolen over 4 years through 163 separate transactions. But that's not the interesting part. I clicked to the next slide. Beacon Holdings, LLC. That's you, Senator Morrison. $2.3 million for consulting services that never existed. Morrison's wife was pulling at his arm, trying to drag him away, but the FBI agent stood firm. Heritage Investment Partners, Judge Harper. That's your vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, bought with my inheritance. The same money you used to rule in Harrington Industries favors 6 times. Harper dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the marble, the sound like a gunshot in the stunned silence. Should I continue? I asked, swiping through more documents. There are 12 shell companies, 3 senators, 2 federal judges, 1 governor's chief of staff, all funded by a murdered couple's orphan daughter. Victoria lunged toward me, but Agent Walsh caught her arm. I wouldn't do that, Mrs. Harrington. These are lies. Victoria screamed. Photoshopped. Fabricated. Actually, Rebecca Martinez stepped forward, her press badge now visible. The Wall Street Journal has been independently verifying these documents for 6 months. Our forensic accountants confirmed every transaction. The story goes live in. She checked her phone. 3 minutes. I switched to the next slide. Screenshots of Victoria's emails. Let's talk about the murders, Victoria. These are your emails to Dr. Marcus Steinfeld, discussing the problem of my parents' life insurance policy. The one that named their daughter as sole beneficiary. The policy you couldn't touch unless they died, and you became my guardian. The room was pure chaos now. Some guests were openly crying. Others were shouting into phones to their lawyers. Senator Blackwood's wife had fainted. But here's my favorite, I said, pulling up the final, devastating document. This is from yesterday. Victoria's divorce lawyer's files. She's been planning to frame James for everything, take over Harrington Industries, and have him committed. James turned to Victoria, his face a mask of utter betrayal. She's been documenting your violent episodes for 2 years, James. I cut in, training you like a dog, then planning to put you down when you outlived your usefulness. Victoria's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. You ungrateful little no. I cut her off, my voice steady. Rising above the din, I'm grateful. Grateful you finally showed everyone who you really are. Grateful you gave me the evidence I needed. Grateful that justice exists, even if it takes 25 years to arrive. The projection screen changed one last time. A news headline blared across it. Breaking news. Harrington Empire collapses amid federal investigation. The kingdom had fallen. You think you're alone in this? I asked Victoria as the FBI agents moved closer. You think you're the only one who keeps records? 5 former Harrington Industries employees stepped forward from various corners of the ballroom. They'd been there all along, invited as plus ones by sympathetic guests. Maria Santos spoke first, her voice strong after years of forced silence. I have photographs of every injury, every locked door, every meal withheld as punishment. 20 years of child abuse, documented and notarized. I have the original trust documents. Thomas Harrington announced, James's brother emerging from behind a group of stunned guests. Before you altered them, before you stole from a 4-year-old orphan. I've been waiting 30 years to show these to federal prosecutors. Dr. Alan Morrison, my childhood pediatrician, held up a thick medical file. Every suspicious injury, every request for inappropriate medications, every time you demanded I sedate a healthy child, the medical board will be very interested. Lies, Victoria screamed, but her voice was losing its power, her composure crumbling. Conspiracy? The only conspiracy, Marcus Sullivan said, entering with a team of associates, is the one you've been running for 25 years. I'm representing Ms. Harrington in both criminal and civil proceedings. We're seeking full restitution plus damages. 2 more figures entered the ballroom. federal judges Catherine Chun and Michael Williams, who were not on the Harrington payroll. Agent Walsh announced. Judge Chun stated, her voice clear and authoritative, they've been overseeing this sealed investigation for 18 months. Every word spoken tonight is being recorded as evidence. Additionally, Rebecca Martinez added, her fingers flying across her phone, the story is now live. Front page of the Journal, picked up by AP, Reuters, and the BBC. The Harrington name is trending globally. I watched Victoria's face cycle through a dizzying array of emotions. Rage, fear, disbelief, and finally, a cold, calculating scan for an escape route that didn't exist. You can't prove, she started. Actually, Judge Chun interrupted, her gaze unwavering. Miss Harrington's evidence is the most comprehensive financial fraud documentation I've seen in 30 years on the bench. Every transaction traced, every document authenticated, every witness credible. The commitment papers you had Dr. Thompson prepare actually help our case. Marcus added, a hint of dark satisfaction in his voice. They show premeditation, conspiracy to deprive Miss Harrington of her legal rights, and attempted involuntary imprisonment. James had collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. Victoria, how could you? Shut up, she snapped at him, the mask fully gone now. You weak, pathetic, please continue, Agent Walsh said, her recorder held steadily. Anything you say can and will be used against you. The hunters had become the hunted, and there was nowhere left to run. Agent Walsh stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos like a sharp blade. James Harrington, you're under arrest for assault and battery, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and violations of the RICO Act. 2 agents moved in, handcuffs gleaming under the chandeliers. James didn't resist. He seemed almost relieved as the cold metal clicked around his wrists. Victoria Harrington, Walsh continued, her voice resonating through the shocked silence. You're under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and murder in the first degree of Catherine and William Brennan. Murder. The word rippled through the crowd, a chilling echo. The toxicology reports Ms. Harrington provided, combined with your documented purchase of the same sedatives, Agent Walsh explained, constitute probable cause. You'll be held without bail pending trial. As the handcuffs touched Victoria's wrists, her phone rang. She couldn't answer it, but I recognized the ringtone. The board of directors' emergency line. Marcus answered his own phone, listened intently, then announced, the Harrington Industries Board has convened an emergency session. Effective immediately, James Harrington is terminated for cause under Section 14.3 of the corporate bylaws, violence at a company event. All voting shares are transferred to the emergency trust. No, James shouted, a desperate, broken sound. This is my company. My father's company. Marcus corrected him coolly. The board has also voted to freeze all corporate accounts pending federal investigation. Victoria's signing authority is revoked. Another phone rang. Senator Morrison's. His aide answered, went pale, and whispered urgently in his ear, what do you mean? The Times has everything. Morrison hissed, his face crumpling. More phones, more panic. The dominoes weren't just falling. They were creating an avalanche. Rebecca Martinez held up her phone, showing a rapidly climbing number. The video of James pushing Elise has been viewed 2.3 million times in the last 10 minutes. Hashtag Harrington Assault is trending worldwide. The stock market opens in Asia in 2 hours, someone whispered terrified. Harrington Industries will be worthless by morning. 3 federal judges in attendance had already recused themselves from any future proceedings. 12 board members from various companies were resigning via email. The Massachusetts Attorney General was announcing a widespread corruption probe. Your parents' estate will be fully restored, Judge Chun told me, her voice kind. With interest and penalties, you're looking at approximately $127 million. But I wasn't looking at the money. I was watching Victoria's face as she realized her entire world, built on my parents' bodies and my stolen childhood, was collapsing in real time. This isn't over, she hissed at me, pure venom in her voice, as agents led her away. You're right. I replied, a profound sense of satisfaction settling over me. This is just the beginning. The trial will be spectacular. The ballroom doors closed behind them with a final, echoing sound, like the ceiling of a tomb. Within an hour, the Harrington empire collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Bloomberg broke the news at 9:04 p.m. Harrington Industries stock futures plummet 40% on fraud allegations. By 10:15, it was down 60%. Trading was halted, but everyone knew it was too late. 8 major partners canceled contracts via emergency conference calls. Westfield Development pulled their $200 million project. Boston General Hospital ended their pharmaceutical partnership. Even the country club, the one James's grandfather had founded, revoked the family membership. Victoria's phone, now in FBI custody, received 47 emails in 30 minutes. Each one was another resignation, another severed tie, another ally jumping ship. The subject lines told the story. Effective immediately. Termination of relationship. Cease all contact, please. Victoria tried one last manipulation as agents let her past me. We can make a deal. I have information about the others. Morrison, Harper, everyone. I'll testify. The FBI already has everything they need. Agent Walsh informed her, her voice flat. Miss Harrington's evidence is comprehensive. James looked at me with something like clarity for the first time in years. The conditioning, he said quietly. You knew about the conditioning. I documented everything, James, I confirmed. Every trigger, every response. Your therapy records will help in your defense. Victoria's manipulation might get you reduced charges. I'm sorry, he said, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the man he might have been without Victoria's poison. I'm so sorry. But apologies couldn't undo 25 years. They couldn't bring back my parents or return my stolen childhood. The guests were fleeing now, desperate to distance themselves from a scandal. Senator Morrison was on the phone with his lawyer, his wife openly weeping beside him. Judge Harper had already left, only to find reporters waiting outside. The Blackwoods tried to leave through the service entrance, only to be met by more photographers. MS, Harrington, Agent Walsh approached me. We'll need you to come to the federal building tomorrow for a full deposition. I'll be there at 8 a.m., I confirmed. The ballroom, which had been so perfectly arranged for my public humiliation, was now a crime scene. Yellow tape was being strung up. Evidence markers were placed. The ice sculptures were melting, the champagne going flat. Victoria's careful stage direction utterly destroyed. The kingdom hadn't just fallen. It had been obliterated. By midnight, the court had issued emergency orders. I stood in the same ballroom, now empty except for FBI agents and my legal team, as Judge Shun made it official. Given the evidence of systematic theft and fraud, this court appoints Elise Harrington as temporary administrator of all disputed assets. Effective immediately, Marcus handed me a folder. The family accounts are frozen, except for your access. The houses, the cars, the investments. You control everything while the criminal cases proceed. The board wants to meet with you Monday, another lawyer added. They're hoping you'll consider taking James's position, at least temporarily. I almost laughed. The same board that had ignored my existence for 25 years now wanted me to save their company. I'll meet with them, I said, but on my terms. My phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. Miss Harrington, this is Amanda Foster from Cromwell and Associates. We'd like to offer you a senior partnership. Name your salary. I declined. For more firms called in the next 10 minutes. Each offer more desperate than the last. What will you do? Marcus asked, a hopeful note in his voice. Start my own firm, I decided, specializing in financial fraud and family abuse cases. Pro bono for those who can't afford it. Rebecca Martinez was typing furiously. Can I quote you on that? Quote this, I said, a fire growing in my chest. The Harrington name is about to mean something different. Something better. I walked through the ruined ballroom, my heels clicking on marble, now marked with evidence tags. The portrait of James's grandfather watched from the wall. Another tyrant who'd built wealth on others' misery. Take it down, I told the federal agents. Take them all down. My phone showed over 200 messages, interview requests, book deals, documentary offers. But also something else. Messages from other victims, other adoptees, other survivors, people who've been crushed by powerful families. You gave us hope, one read. You showed us it's possible to fight back. That was worth more than the $127 million the court would restore, worth more than the companies begging to hire me, worth more than Victoria's shattered empire. I'd taken back more than money or status. I'd taken back my story. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in social destruction. Victoria's carefully curated image disintegrated across every platform. The 12 charity boards she dominated for decades held emergency meetings. She was removed from each one within hours. The Boston Society Register, which had featured the Harringtons for 6 generations, struck their name from the rolls. The Met Gala Committee, the Symphony Board, the Museum of Fine Arts. Every institution that had courted Harrington money now treated the name like poison. Harrington Industries loses $2.1 billion in market value. The Financial Times reported. The stock had dropped 78% before trading was suspended indefinitely. Shareholders were filing class action lawsuits. The SEC announced a decades-long audit going back to when James's father ran the company. But the real devastation came from the witnesses. All 89 of them went public within days, giving interviews, sharing documentation, posting evidence on social media. Maria Santos appeared on 60 Minutes, showing photographs of a 4-year-old me locked in a closet for crying about my dead parents. Dr. Morrison published his medical notes in the New England Journal of Medicine, sparking a national conversation about mandatory reporting laws. Thomas Harrington, James's brother, held his own press conference. This family has been corrupt for 3 generations. My father, James's father, built this empire on fraud. I have documents going back to the 1960s. The political fallout was swift and brutal. Senator Morrison resigned to focus on his legal defense. Senator Blackwood withdrew from his re-election campaign. Senator Reeves was expelled from 3 committees pending investigation. Judge Harper took early retirement, his legacy destroyed overnight. Judge Steinberg fled to his non-extradition home in Switzerland, abandoning his federal pension rather than face charges. The Boston Globe published a series called The Harrington Web, mapping every connection, every payoff, every crime. It would win a Pulitzer, but more importantly, it triggered investigations into 15 other wealthy families suspected of similar crimes. This is bigger than just the Harringtons, the Massachusetts Attorney General announced. We're looking at systematic corruption among Boston's elite, spanning decades. My phone showed the numbers. 234 audio files have been played 50 million times across various platforms. The video of James pushing me had reached 100 million views. Justice for Elise had generated 2 billion impressions. But the number that mattered most was 47. The number of abuse survivors who'd reached out, say my story gave them courage to pursue their own justice. You didn't just destroy them, Marcus told me, watching the news coverage with a satisfied smirk. You started a revolution. Victoria and James would face trial in 6 months. Federal prosecutors were seeking 20 years for James and life for Victoria, given the murder charges. Their lawyers were already discussing plea deals, but the FBI wasn't interested in negotiation. The empire hadn't just fallen. It had been erased from history, except as a cautionary tale. The ripples spread far beyond Boston. 3 state senators from Connecticut, New York, and Rhode Island announced sudden resignations after journalists connected them to Harrington money. A federal investigation called Operation Broken Trust expanded to include 43 politicians across New England. The FBI established a dedicated task force with 50 agents working full-time on cases stemming from my evidence. Massachusetts passed Elisa's law in emergency session, the strongest protection for adopted children in the nation. It required quarterly welfare checks, independent financial audits, and mandatory reporting of any signs of abuse. 7 other states announced similar legislation within a week. The documentary offers kept coming, but it was the call from Samantha Reed that stopped me cold. She was 17, living with adoptive parents in Chicago who'd been draining her trust fund. "Your story saved my life," she said through tears. "I showed your video to my teacher. She called the police. They found everything. The forged signatures, the stolen money, all of it. By week's end, I'd heard from 200 similar cases. Marcus helped me establish the Brennan Foundation, named for my biological parents. With an initial funding of $10 million from the recovered assets, we would provide free legal services to adoptees and foster children facing financial exploitation. Harrington Industries, meanwhile, was being dissected and sold piece by piece. The board begged me to take over, to save what could be saved. I agreed to one meeting. "You want me to save a company built on blood money?" I asked the 12 board members who'd enabled James for years. The same company that funded my abuse. The employees, the interim CEO, pleaded. 3,000 people who had nothing to do with this. That was the leverage they thought they had. But I'd already thought of that. "I'll buy the company," I announced, for $1. "In exchange, I'll guarantee all employee pensions and jobs for 2 years while we restructure." But the Harrington name dies today. The company will be rebuilt as Brennan Industries, and 50% of profits will go to victims of financial abuse. They had no choice. The company was worthless without my intervention, and they knew it. The sale was finalized in 72 hours. The first act of Brennan Industries was to establish a $100 million victim compensation fund. The second was to fire every executive who'd been complicit in the Harrington's crimes. From the ashes, Rebecca Martinez wrote in her follow-up story, "Elise Harrington has built something unprecedented, justice that pays dividends." But the real change was in the hundreds of messages flooding in daily. Survivors finding courage, lawyers offering pro bono help, journalists investigating similar cases. One message stood out from a federal prosecutor. "You've given us a template to take down corrupt dynasties nationwide." The Harrington case is now required reading at Quantico. The revolution wasn't just starting. It was spreading like wildfire. The cease and desist letter was hand-delivered to Victoria in federal detention and to James at the minimum security facility where he awaited trial. No contact for 5 years. I'd instructed Marcus. After that, only through legal counsel. No letters, no calls, no messages through third parties. Any violation will result in additional charges. Victoria had tried to write me from jail. 7 letters in the first week, oscillating between threats and manipulation. "You'll regret this. I'm still your mother. We can work this out." Each one was returned unopened and filed as evidence of harassment. James sent only one letter, which my lawyer summarized for me. An apology and a request to testify against Victoria in exchange for my forgiveness. I declined both. His apology meant nothing without consequences, and forgiveness wasn't mine to give. It belonged to my dead parents. But boundaries weren't just about them. I had to rebuild my entire life outside their shadow. I moved from the Beacon Hill mansion to a $3.5 million penthouse downtown, paid for with my own money, chosen for its floor-to-ceiling windows that let in light the Harrington house had always blocked. The old mansion was being converted into a shelter for abuse survivors. Every dark room transformed into something healing. "You could have kept it," Marcus said during the renovation planning. "Some places are too poisonous to save," I replied. "Better to let them become something else entirely." The Brennan Foundation's headquarters occupied the top floor of my new building. Glass walls, open spaces, nothing hidden. We established strict protocols, financial transparency reports published quarterly, independent audits, a survivor board of directors. Everything the Harringtons had hidden, we made visible. I hired Maria Santos as the Foundation's head of survivor services. She knew better than anyone what to look for, what questions to ask. Dr. Morrison joined our medical advisory board. Thomas Harrington, James's brother, donated his entire inheritance to the cause. Boundaries aren't walls, I told the Boston Globe in my first major interview. They're definitions. This is who I am. This is what I'll accept. This is what I won't. The interview went viral, particularly one quote. "For 25 years, I was told that family means accepting abuse. But real family, chosen or biological, means respect. It means safety. It means love without conditions or manipulation. Support groups started using my interview as required reading. Therapists quoted it in sessions. Universities added it to their social work curricula. But the most important boundary was internal. Every morning, I looked in the mirror and reminded myself, you are not what they did to you. You are what you chose to become. Despite them, the Harringtons had tried to make me nothing. Instead, I'd become everything they feared: independent, powerful, and absolutely beyond their control. 1 year later, I stood in the offices of Brennan Legal. My firm had generated $10 million in revenue while taking 60% of cases pro bono. We'd helped 47 families recover stolen assets, removed 23 children from abusive situations, and put 12 perpetrators behind bars. The Times wants to know if you'll comment on the verdicts. My assistant informed me. Victoria had been sentenced to life without parole for the murders of my parents, plus 45 years for financial crimes. She'd aged a decade in a year, her designer facade crumbling into something hollow and bitter. James got 12 years, with possibility of parole in 7. The jury had accepted that Victoria's psychological manipulation was a mitigating factor, though not an excuse. No comment, I decided. The verdicts speak for themselves. My book, Blood Money, a memoir of survival, had spent 30 weeks on the bestseller list. Every penny of the $5 million advance went to the foundation. The documentary had won 3 Emmys. The podcast series had 50 million downloads. But none of that was about me anymore. It was about the movement we'd started. You have a visitor, my assistant added. Says she's from Seattle. The woman was 35, professionally dressed, but with tired eyes. I recognized her as another survivor. My adoptive parents run a tech company, she began. They've been stealing my patents, claiming my work is theirs. I have evidence, but no one believes me because they're so respected. We believe you, I said simply. Let's look at your evidence. 3 hours later, we had a case. Another empire would fall. Another survivor would reclaim their story. That evening, I walked through Boston Common, the same park where Victoria used to parade me like a prize poodle. Parents played with their children. Real families built on love, not leverage. A teenage girl recognized me, whispered to her mother, then approached nervously. Miss Brennan, she corrected herself. I'm adopted, too, and my parents are amazing. But I wanted to thank you. You made it safer for all of us. That was the real victory. Not the money recovered or the criminals jailed, but the systemic change. Adoption agencies had implemented new safeguards. Courts had established oversight protocols. Laws had been rewritten. As I stood in my penthouse that night, looking out at the city lights, I thought about my biological parents, Catherine and William Brennan, who died when I was 4, but somehow left me everything I needed. Not just money, but evidence of their love. Proof that I'd been wanted, chosen, cherished. The Harringtons had tried to erase them, to make me forget I'd ever been loved properly. They'd failed. Sometimes you have to fall all the way to the ground to realize you were always meant to fly. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what's really yours. Sometimes you have to laugh in the face of evil to remember that you're good. My story ends here, but yours might be just beginning. If you're trapped in a toxic situation, remember, evidence is power, boundaries are your right, and truth always find a way. What would you have done if you were in my shoes that night? Let me know in the comments below. I'd truly love to hear your thoughts.